Short-term, long-term, any of these signings matter?
I don't know if they matter, at least moving the needle too much. I do really like what Seattle did with Geno Smith. I think they basically got a very comparable deal to what, the Las Vegas Raiders paid for Jimmy Garoppolo. And I think that, Geno Smith very much is, I would say, a step above Jimmy Garoppolo at this point in time. And it still provides them, a ton of flexibility in their roster construction. They can very much still go out and draft a quarterback with the 5th overall pick and very much have their long-term guy and still kind of have Geno Smith in the fold. So they are set up, I would say, kind of for long-term success. I think, when you're looking at the NFC, obviously the Eagles and the 49ers are going to continue to jump out at you. But outside of that, like, Seattle's maybe a team that could, very easily, I would say, kind of slot into the playoffs for the next couple seasons just based on what they've done and how productive they've been through the draft, and the fact that they, have kind of cleaned out at least some of the poor contracts and are going to be getting rid of, the remaining ones, I would say, from the secondary perspective here over the next year and a half. So I think Seattle long-term, the Geno Smith deal make too much sense. They got a good, I think they got a good deal with him in the fold. And I think that, if they do go quarterback at 5, they are very much going to be a team that I could think have some sustained success, I would say, in the NFC and potentially win, that NFC West for a number of years to come.
Ben, I want to bring us to another quarterback that we don't know as well where he's going to be, and that's Lamar Jackson. And he's basically tweeting yesterday, disputing the report that he turned down $200 million guaranteed from the Ravens. And he's kind of mocking people who says he needs an agent. 133, 3 years, fully guaranteed, but I need an agent. What type of deal do you think Lamar wants? And I think for me, selfishly, as part of the media, the fact that he doesn't have an agent makes it hard because we're not getting this leaked information to know really what is going on behind the scenes. I mean, for a while I was like, oh, maybe he wants a Deshaun Watson type of deal. Maybe now he wants something like Patrick Mahomes got. Like, what do you make of this situation in terms of what's going on here?
Yeah, it's really hard to see, a long-term, not like a long-term, I guess, but like a really extended window type Patrick Mahomes deal for Lamar Jackson. I just think that, Baltimore hasn't really been overly interested in locking him into that type of deal. So maybe the Deshaun Watson situation, obviously, could be a closer comp to where he is at from a contract perspective. But I think he wants to get up there past the 3-year mark and very much wants like a higher guaranteed number. So maybe that would be, in the 4 to 5 year range and getting closer to 200, 215 million or something like that. He would probably have to give up a little bit from a guarantee perspective if he does go that route. But I'm surprised that there's not a team kind of willing to give him a contract in that range, right? He's very much been, at various stretches, the most dynamic player at the quarterback position, can kind of, do it all. Maybe he doesn't have as much of a highlight reel throwing type plays like Patrick Mahomes has, but like I think when he's healthy, is very much going to be consistently a top 4, top 3 type quarterback, and I think you can very much engineer an offense around him to consistently be in the playoffs. So I'm surprised a team like Atlanta, who has definitely shelled out a ton of money to various positions here, isn't a bigger player, I would say, than the Lamar Jackson sweepstakes. So I think right now, unfortunately, he's going to be back for another 1-year type contract with Baltimore. If he does have a good season, like maybe he gets up into that $200 million contract range. But I very much think that that's what his expectations should be, and very much should probably just go with the 1-year deal if he's not getting close to that type of money from any other place, I would say, right now.
We can't have Ben Brown on the show and not do the Vikings thing. So let's do the Vikings thing, and it's kind of the NFC North thing. And I say the Vikings thing because we all know a lot of bettors are going to be like, you got to fade the Vikings. We'll see what the win total ends up at after going 11-0 one-score games, negative point differential. We all understand. There's going to be change there. But even for me, Ben, I did a double take when I saw that the Vikings and the Chicago Bears just had the worst record in the NFL, are co-second favorites in the division. It's wild to me. It's not surprising that the Lions are the favorite. Everyone assumes that Rodgers is gone, so the Packers are the long shot. But what are your thoughts on each of these teams? Because I think in a wide open NFC, these are interesting storylines with the movement going on in this division.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I know, the Detroit Lions are kind of like the darling of the NFL, I would say, in a lot of ways. And I know we talked about them a lot, throughout the season. But and someone has to win the division, but I think maybe I'm a little bit surprised at how farther away they are than the Minnesota Vikings and Chicago Bears and even the Green Bay Packers. Like, this is very much a division up for grabs. No real solid teams. Very comparable, I would say, in some ways to the NFC South. So maybe I'm not as big of a believer as, in the Detroit Lions as everyone else, but I still think there are some issues with potentially Jared Goff not being as good as he was last year. If that does happen, they definitely still have some secondary concerns, even though they did go out and sign, some guys from a depth perspective for that. So I don't know. I don't think they're clearly the favorite in the way in which they're priced. I personally, as a Vikings backer, so take this with a grain of salt, but it's been a little bit of, a two-sided coin, I would say, with what they've done from a free agency perspective. In a lot of ways, they've signaled a long-term rebuild approach, but then they go out and sign, a young guy like Marcus Davenport for a 1-year deal, get Byron Murphy for a 2-year deal. So they very much, in some ways, those moves kind of set them up in a way to kind of be winning right now. They do kick, in some ways, the can down the road with the Kirk Cousins contract, but it seems like they're not comfortable completely bottoming out. And I think that that's going to speak to them, potentially at least being relevant in this division. So I think they should maybe be a little bit closer. I would probably squeeze some juice out closer to it being like the Lions, like plus 150, plus 175 range, having the Vikings maybe in the plus 250 range. And I don't think that, the Packers are going to be as far off as what the betting market has them priced. So then the question becomes, where do you sit with the Chicago Bears, of course, right? And, in a lot of ways, they've done a lot of things right, but this is still a spot where I think people are probably overreacting. They're probably trying to identify, the 2023 Philadelphia Eagles in a lot of ways. And maybe that's, a valid comparison, but this still seems like the Bears are probably going to be much closer to like the 2021, 2022 version of Philadelphia that got, kind of manhandled in the playoffs against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And, very much we're kind of setting up, but still, a year or so away. That's kind of my expectation for the Chicago Bears at the front end of it. They still do need to figure out, exactly what they have with Justin Fields in the fold. And I just don't believe that this wide receiver room, even with DJ Moore, is anywhere close to what Philadelphia can offer. It really is even, as close to what Justin Fields actually needs to be successful every single play. So I think, although the orders may be correct, I think it should probably be a lot tighter between all 4 teams, because to me, there's just no distinction. And I do think it's probably going to come down to maybe even a few lucky type plays where teams do win some 1-score games to kind of decide this division, I would say, in 2023.
Ben, I find it interesting what the Dolphins are doing. I mean, they're signing all kinds of guys. Raheem Mostert, Jalen Ramsey, Jeff Wilson Jr. We now know that Mike White is going to be there. I don't know if Mike White is any good, but it's like they're signaling that they're all in, except there's this huge question mark with Tua and his availability. Is it risky, or is Mike McDaniel just going to be like Kyle Shanahan and like, hey, we don't really know what we have at quarterback, but it doesn't matter as long as you have a pulse. We got some weapons around you. We'll get it done. Like, what is going on in Miami?
Yeah, I think they do still have, very valid concerns about Tua's health and everything else and where he's going to be at. And I think that kind of, speaks to Mike White's contract. He got a better deal than guys like Andy Dalton, very much, top of market, backup quarterback. So for whatever reason, it seems like McDaniel kind of identified him and very much wanted him in the fold to kind of be that backup guy, and thinks that maybe he can potentially win as a long-term starter in Miami if the Tua situation doesn't break correctly. But yeah, they are all in, right? And I think when you go all in and you do still have the quarterback, questions, especially in the AFC, like there are a number of valid concerns. And I think that, we could very easily see their season it maybe end in a similar fashion to what it did this year, because they don't have that quarterback situation solidified, and they very much probably have, the rest of the roster, I would say, to win. Unfortunately, if you don't have the quarterback position, you're very much, I would say, not going to get over the hump in the AFC.
I see you guys are grading every single free agency signing over at PFF. What, at the risk of being part of the overreaction that we're seeing in the betting markets, is there a team that stands out to you, AFC and NFC, that is, quote, winning the offseason?
Yeah, I mean, I do think in a lot of ways, the reason why people are so bullish on, the Bears right now is because, they have kind of won the offseason from a free agency perspective, and also the draft and everything else. Like it's you go back to the Panthers trade with them, and I think Carolina in some ways maybe would have been a somewhat popular selection in the NFC South, but they gave up, a ton to move up to number one. And very much it's hard to see, a young quarterback being really successful in that particular offense, given the players that they have at the skill positions now, moving forward here in 2023. So I think going back to it, it shows, how well the Bears have actually navigated this situation, but it's still a spot where we probably have overreacted to it, because we did see, the dramatic jump for the Eagles in this past offseason. I think that everyone's kind of expecting, that sort of thing to happen every single year. And I just don't think that, the likelihood of a team making such a, dramatic jump to being potential Super Bowl contenders in one off season because of the draft capital and ability to spend in free agency is really going to be, a sustained long-term approach every single year for these teams. So I know we're chasing the Eagles outlook from this past season, but I just don't think we're going to find it again this year.
Yeah. On the heels of Joe's question, is there anything that you would bet right now in terms of draft, division, awards, or any futures?
I do like Seattle. I know we kind of mentioned it at the beginning. I'm very much trying to identify teams in the NFC that I think can make the playoffs. And if you for one, going back to it, if you don't buy into the NFC North and if you don't buy into the NFC South, like there's a ton of teams in the NFC East and NFC West that should very much almost be able to fall backwards into the playoffs in a lot of situations. So I think Seattle's the clear team from that perspective. It seems like the Rams are, very much going to go through a rebuild. The Cardinals very much already are in the midst of a rebuild. So the Seahawks could easily take a step back from a football perspective and still finish, I would say, with a playoff berth and potentially, one or two upsets away from even getting into the Super Bowl. So I like them quite a bit. I also think, some teams in the AFC, I have, appreciated some of the signings that Cleveland Browns have had specifically. So I think if the AFC North is a little bit more wide open, especially if Lamar Jackson doesn't land in Baltimore, they're a team that I think could at least be moving in the right direction and probably are, far enough under the radar to the point where they might be a little bit of a buying opportunity in the futures market as well.